Let's talk Jinx, a weekly Jinx video we do every Wednesday about anything to do with Jinx, as well as this video acting as a weekly discussion thread on the Jinx subreddit, our League of Jinx. Make sure to go check that out. And for this video, to be more of like a community-driven video, what I wanted to do was talk about what does success look like for Jinx at each phase of the game in your opinion. So basically what I'm going to do in this video is kind of describe, like in the early phase, in the mid game, and the late game, what like the general things people say are what's going right if you're playing Jinx. And in the comments, you can kind of flesh that out, be it based on your elo, your experience, builds, matchups, comps, whatever you want. And so there we go. That way, it's kind of a little bit of an idea kind of put together for the subreddit and then also for the YouTube side and the people watching without it being me saying, oh, this is how it should be, right? Because I'm not in all elos at all time. I feel like the game kind of varies sometimes in different places for different elos. And I think that way it can be more inclusive of everybody involved. So for example, in the early lane phase, right? A lot of people will argue, depending on the composition, depending on if you have a hard engaged support or a peeling support, you probably want to farm more. And in both scenarios, you probably want to farm more too, because you want to get that gold to get your items to get to that coveted late game where Jinx is at her most powerful. That being said, if you have a peeling support specifically, a lot of people will argue you kind of want to try and freeze the lane. And if you've never heard the term freezing the lane, it's basically when you have the minion wave kind of frozen in a specific point. And when you're trying to freeze the lane for your advantage, you want to freeze it right before your tower range, but not at your tower range, because your tower will then reset the wave and push that wave back into the enemy comp. And when that happens, they can try and take control back of the minion wave and manipulate it themselves. That's like minion manipulation, if you've ever heard that term as well. The reason you put it right in front of your tower as well, because some people be like, well, isn't that you almost getting pushed in? That seems kind of problematic, or that seems kind of wrong, like you're giving the lane away to the enemy laners. Not necessarily. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters with the laning phase in terms of what you're really giving up is sometimes pressure, yes, but as long as you're not dying and you're not giving away like a lot of minions to them for free, which is also experience, even if they're like pretty bad at last hitting, there can be an advantage for freezing the wave here. The first and foremost one, of course, is the jungler. If you've ever been autofill jungle, or you actually play jungle as your second role, or you ever maybe used to be a jungler, maybe you're thinking about being a jungler, one of the most stressful parts about jungling isn't actually, PvEing the jungle camps. It's the concept of having to go to lane, messing up, and then being flamed by your laners basically for the rest of the game. Ganking, basically, is what I'm getting towards, right? If you freeze the lane in front of your tower, you make it easier for your jungler to want to gank, because you also make it easy for them to gank, or at least more easier to gank if they're competent in any way whatsoever. Because then the enemy has to be pushed up pretty far in the lane to even get close enough to soak experience, even if they're not last hitting, because maybe they're being cautious. They're like, oh, I don't like being this far up in the lane. It's why people don't freeze the lane usually in the middle of the lane. It's more of a 50-50, and you want it to be more like an 80-20 in your favor. So yes, there's a possibility, right, that if the lane gets pushed into your tower or whatever, that could be unfortunate. But if you can push it back, if that happens, and kind of freeze it again if that happens, like if it breaks, but also if you just hold out, your jungler can kind of gank and make your job as a Jinx pretty easy. Now that's kind of generic advice, not really Jinx specific advice. So what's Jinx specific advice? I'd say the flame chompers are pretty important in the laning phase. Granted, I think they're also pretty important in choke points and team fights and stuff like that, but the flame chompers in their use are probably pretty sparingly unless you have like a guaranteed CC setup, which leads more into hard engaged supports. If you have a Leona, a Thresh, a Blitzcrank, and stuff like that, there's this technique called the level 2, which basically means you don't actually even care if you're last hitting, and you don't even care if your support is last hitting or just hitting minions at that point. You're trying to kill the minion wave before the enemy kills your minions and hit level 2 first. And if you have something like you could also go zap second, but some people go for the flame chompers, because if you have a Thresh or something and they go in with their E first and then they land a hook, you can chain it with the flame chompers. And again, you might not actually take them out of lane and like get a kill off of that, but you might push them out of lane or force them off the minion wave because it'll be pretty low. They need to heal up with their health pots. They might have to even use heal and flash and make it easier for the rest of the lane to kind of take control again of the minion wave, which then you can get experience and gold on a Jinx and wants those items. But also, Jinx is not really considered a lane bully, and this is kind of an angle you can use Jinx and her flame chompers specifically at level 2 to kind of actually bully in lane a bit. It's a bit more reliable on the support, but some people will say the entire AD carry class is dependable on the support in the laning phase. Just as much actually as the support is dependent on you. As much as some people are kind of like, I don't like being able to play or not having to be able to play lane without a support, The support depends on you to last hit and gain experience and stuff for them as well. It's kind of like a partnership in that regards. But I can understand there obviously will be some frustrations with that dynamic, and don't get me wrong, I'm not going to go into that too much. But as a Jinx, that is a way you can kind of put the power into your own hands, despite being somewhat of a non-lane bully and somewhat of a non-kind of like a early game AD carry. Now with the rockets, of course, you can try and use the rockets AoE splash damage to bully enemy laners that step up too far in the laning phase and stuff like that. That's also a possibility too, but you want to use those sparingly as well because it does use mana, and Jinx's mana regeneration is one of the highest in the game in the late game, not the early game. So let's pretend you did any one of these techniques, you farmed up, or you even got to level 2, and you can also repeat that as you get to the next level, to like level 3 all in, etc. Let's say that went correctly. Let's say that was what we thought the success looked like for Jinx, is either doing one of those two things and basically just not dying. What about the mid game? Because I feel like the mid game is the one part where a lot of people and all elos and pro play can struggle when it comes to this one thing, and that's also continuing to get minions. Let's say you've been practicing your last hitting a lot. Jinx's minigun maybe makes it a little bit easier. It has the extra attack speed, so that way if you last hit something a bit too soon, maybe you can get another last hit in. With that being said, how do you farm outside of the laning phase? Let's say you did a really great job farming in the laning phase. Your farm was actually fantastic. You feel great about it. You feel like you can do something about it. You got some items from all the gold you got from it. It's going great. The issue then is, well then what happens, because out of laning phase, one of two things probably comes across your table, especially as a Jinx. A tower destroying AD carry. It's like, well, do we like rotate to other lanes and start helping knock down other towers? Do we actually stay here and try and farm up a bit more because we want to get those late game items? And if we're already last hitting pretty well, and we got the enemy's bot lane tower, what we talked about earlier about freezing the minion wave, well now your jungler is going to have even more of a time coming around to gank because you don't have to worry about that tower. So you just need to keep that area of the jungle warded up right near that part of the tower where it fell and just make their path thing a lot easier, and you could probably just snowball through the bottom lane. Which one do you go for? And this is more of a question for you if you're still watching than for me explaining, because for me in my experience, it always depended. I had a really bad game on Sivir where me and my support actually dominated the enemy bot lane, and we tried to rotate our advantage to other lanes, and those laners just got really mad at us and actually flamed us for doing so. And then when the enemy bot lane showed up in their lanes, they're like, you did this is your fault for doing this, without realizing the enemy bot lane was going to be there anyways because they lost to us. It was one of the only games I felt really good about destroying somebody. I'm not trying to brag, but I'm saying it was one of those games we all have every once in a while where we actually just dominate our enemy laner. We're just like, oh okay, we're actually just the better AD carry. They're going there because that's what you do on the losing side. You need to kind of group up and try and maybe salvage the game that way. They're going to be there anyways. Also, I was a Sivir. We had things like Olaf and stuff on our team. I'm thinking I have my ultimate. We can make plays with that too, but no, they just want to get angry. So me and my support, we pushed all the way to inhib, and they still got mad at us because it was like we kept trying to group other places because our mid and top started getting destroyed. So that's the kind of the question where it's like, okay, do you want to push an advantage? Or do you want to try and take all of bot lane and just hope your laners last long enough so that maybe you can not only push down the inhibitor, but then at that point just push into the base and maybe take the tower? Because the enemy team was actually grouping up, and so when we push to inhib, they start grouping on bot lane. So it's not like we could just go take the game for free. Stuff like that comes to mind. Because advantage could be very important. With a tower destroying AD carry like Jinx, those towers will not only fall, they will fall pretty quickly. It's not like you're a magic damage user or something like that, where the towers don't take a lot of damage, or you don't have a lot of DPS even if you do some damage to them. Jinx is really good at objectives, and at the end of the game, not the end of the game, that's what you want to do in League of Legends, is take down objectives, eventually the Nexus, which is the main objective. But there are other times where maybe there is benefit for farming solo lanes and letting your laners kind of farm up more XP and experience and stuff like that. That's the question basically. Do you think there's some instances where it's better just kind of go back to bottom lane, let your other laners get strong still too, and then group up maybe later on, especially because you're not going to get weaker, you're just going to get stronger as the late game comes on? Which then segues us into that coveted late game. What do you think the late game success story for Jinx is? Because for a lot of people, obviously team fighting comes to mind as a strength of Jinx. You're going to have a lot of your items, your crits and auto attacks are going to be crazy, your range is going to be crazy, your resets are going to be pretty crazy too. But here's the issue. For some people, they feel like Jinx can also be considerably weak in the late game without proper pill. You're in the late game, well guess what? Talon's in the late game, Zed's in the late game, a high-powered mage is in the late game. They can probably kill you just as easily as you can kill them. The difference is it feels like you can kill them though, with a couple auto attacks and call it good. It feels like there's a lot of agency potentially in your hands. which is why I want to finish this video on a thought from August Browning, the kit designer for Jinx. You can find him as August Uwu over on Twitch when he streams. And his concept actually as the kit designer for Jinx, he actually feels Jinx is a mid-game champion. We've talked about this before. His opinion is Jinx is a mid-game champion if you're playing her at the best of her ability, because you actually can go out of lane phase and snowball the game in the mid-game and kind of with resets and stuff, kind of win the game through the mid game before you're having to rely on that late game. It's just that if you go to late game, you're going to be powerful enough to kind of do some stuff there. And so with that being said, is the late game actually more of a liability for Jinx? And you should be focusing on trying to snowball the game in that mid game, kind of what we talked about earlier and why I made that question. So I'm going to pass it off to you guys in the video. It kind of is an interesting thing. Again, it might depend on elo and stuff like that, how often you can rely on your teammates and the whatnot. But that's all from this video from me. So thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell notification, the actual subscribe button. But I don't know which video will be next, because I can have a lot of kinks. So until next time, take care. GG, get jinxed. Thank you for watching, and enjoy pizza responsibly.